All right, wonderful. Welcome everyone to On the Park Bench, a public square conversation brought to you by the Congress for the New Urbanism. On the Park Bench presents interactive conversations with thought leaders in new urbanism and allied industries, providing an opportunity for the audience to engage in real time. This webinar series is a platform for CNU members to engage, debate, and collaborate on pressing issues of the day. Today's webinar is Authors Forum, the Equity Planner, with Jason King, Deanna Pena, and Kessie Estil. You can share your thoughts on hashtag #OnTheParkBench at www.tinyurl.com/OTPBfeedback. And you can join us for upcoming On the Park Bench webinars. On Tuesday, April 2nd, join us for Authors Forum City Limits. Join author Megan Kimball to discuss her new book, City Limits, Infrastructure, Inequality, and the Future of America's Highways. And you can register online at cnu.org/resources/ontheparkbench. Also, registration is open for our 32nd annual Congress. CNU 32 will be in Cincinnati, Ohio on May 15th through 18th, 2024. This is the premier national event bringing together policymakers, planners, urban designers, developers, advocates, and more to engage with the trends and challenges related to building community. You can learn more and register before early bird rates close at cnu.org/CNU32. And now for today's webinar. We are joined by Jason King. Jason King is a principal at Kohl Partners and has served as the project director and prime author on over 200 plans for cities, towns, neighborhoods, and corridors. Jason has authored 2 books, The Climate Planner, Overcoming Pushback Against Local Mitigation and Adaptation Plans, and The Equity Planner, 5 Tools to Facilitate Economic Development with Just Outcomes. Deanna Pena is a co-founder and partner at Able City, an architecture and urban planning firm in South Texas. Her experience serving on the board of Bethany House of Laredo, an agency providing shelter and meals for community members in need, has deepened her interests in public policy, social equity, urban design, and exploring the relationship between the built environment and mental health. She now resides in San Antonio. Kessie Estil is a native of Haiti, is a passionate urban planner and designer. Her educational journey began with a bachelor's degree in architecture and urban planning from Florida Atlantic University. Building on this foundation, she pursued a master's in urban and regional planning, deepening her understanding of land use, transportation, and community dynamics. Since joining Kohl Partners team in 2021, Kessie has been an integral part of numerous urban design projects. From master planning new communities to updating municipal codes, she brings creativity, empathy, and a commitment to equity to every endeavor. Her work extends beyond blueprints and zoning regulations. It's about creating spaces that resonate with people, fostering connections, and enhancing quality of life. And I am Lauren Mayer, Communications Manager at CNU. So I'll turn it over to Jason to start today's webinar.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for having us. Thank you, CNU, for participating today. Hopefully you can see the screen. Yeah. Right, so my name is Jason King with Kohl, and it's a pleasure to be joined by Deanna, a co-author, and Kessie, someone that I get to work with quite often. So just to go right into it, what is equity planning? Equity planning is inclusion and it's shared success. So inclusion is involving people at the decision-making table who ordinarily might not be involved. It's talking to a diverse audience. It's making sure that you're reaching every segment of the population. And shared success is equally important, right? It isn't just enough to have to have a diverse audience. It's also about shared economic success. And for that reason, the book is largely an economic development book about better outcomes for different communities. Equity planning is creating options for people who otherwise wouldn't have them. The American Planning Association does a good job with this definition: the just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. So participate, that's inclusion; prosper, right, and reach their full potential. That, for me, has real economic implications. Because we know that everywhere that we work as new urbanists, traveling around quite often, we find ourselves in a city divided in two, right? Every city, however small, is divided into one, the city of the poor, and the other of the rich. And there's a low level, quiet tension between them in every situation. And it's always been that way. And without equity planning, without a commitment, without an understanding and a commitment to equity planning, urban planners and maybe new urbanists can't help but assume the traditional role of advocating for businesses and the upper class. These are the people who come to the meetings. These are the people who have the time, the resources. Financially, they might be the most invested. And we're doing this instead of working with the needy and the working class, who tend to be people who can't attend as many meetings, don't understand as much about the process, but will be more affected. There's more at stake for them. And so for me, this sort of journey of to learn about equity planning started when we were working in Albany, New York. I talk in the book about how I watched powerlessly as investments made in poor places where I worked paradoxically left the poor in those places worse off. So in Albany, the new urbanism is about increasing property values. So this is a beautiful rendering by Kenneth Garcia. It's about the public realm. It's about reinvestment. And the raising of property values is both good and it's bad. And it's good because, it creates better places and more economic opportunity and more amenities, more things. And there's a lot of people who I found in New York, in cold New York, couldn't wait, were happy the property values were getting raised so they could finally move down to Florida. But then there's also another group, and this is a group that are much more threatened by the increase of property taxes. And I saw that our plan was changing these areas. And they used to have certain kinds of festivals dedicated to new immigrants and new cultures. And all of a sudden that started disappearing. And there was a great, fun, awesome Oktoberfest in the warehouse district of Albany. And it was kinetic. It was helping this whole area to change. But over the years, I started to see that we were displacing a lot of people. And that a lot of the people that I met on the charrette were no longer there. They were renters. They owned businesses, or they lived, in the warehouse district, a difficult place to live in a lot of ways. And slowly they were being pushed out. And I found that I didn't have any tools for dealing with that. I knew how to make a beautiful public realm with our form-based codes and our recommendations on capital improvement plans and our beautiful designs, but I didn't know how to work with them. And so the book was about trying to find a toolkit. What can we bring as new urbanists into these situations, so that way we're helping the people who need our help the most. So equity planning is about the necessities of life, like affordable housing, reliable public transportation, emergency services, good schools, and low crime. And the things that the new urbanists excel at are quality of life elements, walkable mixed-use urbanism, parks and trails, and a great public realm. Our job is to make sure that we're working for both cities, and that what the plan does, or what the book does. I'm always talking about plans. What the book does is it talks about 50 different case studies. Just finding myself in these situations, feeling like I was making the situation, the place, worse in a lot of ways. I was planning for place and not for people, to quote Mitch Silver in his recent park bench. Again, planning for place and not people. And slowly over time, I've been learning from people like Deanna and Kessie who are better at this than me. and slowly I'm working toward being an equity planner. The study of all these different places led me to try to figure out, quickly, what are the 4 attributes of an equitable plan? And those of us who learn architecture in school or on the job, we're familiar with Vitruvius, right? The 5th century BC architect. The 3 qualities of every good building: firmitas, utilitas, and venestas, and commodity, firmness, and delight. Every building needs to have a utility, a use. It needs stability, and it needs to stand strong, and it needs to possess beauty. And the new urbanism is helping to bring back, in a lot of ways, the beauty. So, what about plans? When as the new urbanists move from architectural projects to comprehensive plans or regional plans, what is it that we should bring to every plan? And the philosopher Bertrand Russell, a contemporary philosopher, very, very influential, he talked about the qualities of every individual person, valuable traits to raise in our children or develop in ourselves. And I found these traits totally applicable to the plans that we make. We should make sure that every plan has courage, intelligence, vitality, and sensitivity. And so courage, this is like Daniel Burnham, Make No Small Plans, the whole City Beautiful movement that sort of at the basis of our new urban grand visions. We're bold. We are radical. We draw new buildings and new streets and new public spaces fearlessly. Intelligence is to know what makes places better and what makes them worse, especially, and to help them avoid making them worse. And vitality is sort of the energy, the excitement, and sensitivity. Sensitivity is a corrective. When your plan has enough courage and enough vitality, there are going to be people who are going to suffer adverse impacts. And sensitivity is how you communicate with them, and how you find a way to be more inclusive. So the project, the plan, the book talks about several case studies. I love the plan that DPZ did in Providence, Rhode Island in 1990. This is one of the first plans I ever saw. I was working a parking lot in the downtown, and Andreas Duani and Liz Potter-Zyberg had a charrette. I saw Andreas speak on the steps of City Hall with Buddy Cianci, the infamous mayor. And I was pretty young, and it was one of the big reasons I got into the new urbanism. What was incredible about this plan to bring back the downtown, which has been entirely successful, by the way, is that it was the first plan to say that it's the arts and it's the artistic community. That's where you start. And that artistic community was largely, at that time, and often still is, the gay and lesbian community. Providence was a working class, blue collar town. This group was sort of marginalized. They were sort of living in the downtown, but they had a lot to offer. A lot of them had gone to school at Rhode Island School of Design or Brown University, and they hadn't been part of the planning process before. And DPZ gave them both a physical plan and programming goals. And DPZ, I think, helped teach inclusivity. They brought this group to the table, and that was amazing to see. Montgomery, Alabama, when Victor Dover and Margaret Flippin and Joe Kohl and myself and so many other DKPs arrived at Montgomery, it was dead quiet. The downtown was empty. It had gotten so bad that there were no residents, there were no businesses, there weren't even any pigeons in the downtown. The only resident population were the people living in the county jail. And if you heard anything about Montgomery and its renaissance, that there's a lot has changed. And the interesting thing about Montgomery is that the population of the city of Montgomery has continued to drop. So it's not like Austin or Boston, where the population rose and a renaissance was sort of inevitable. This is a place that still struggles to keep kids in the school or businesses open. It is by sheer will and commitment that Montgomery succeeded. And so we talk about that in the book. The plan for El Paso is one of the most important plans for me personally. One of the things that, and it did a lot of things, and one of the things that it did is it put in place one of the most extensive public transit systems in the world. It's a bus rapid transit system, which connects every part of the city. So they have a downtown trolley, which is wonderful, but it isn't just, their transit commitment isn't just the downtown trolley. It is all these connections, rural areas and urban. They're slowly building the city one transit-oriented development at a time, and it is entirely, feels to me, we continue to work in El Paso, a success. It's inclusive. People are still cheering on planning, even though it's a poor place. It's a border town. It is an area that struggles, but it's planning the right way. I was really impressed too, working with TPDC in Lewiston, Maine. This plan, so it's an old factory town. You see the big factory, and the population had been dropping. It started in about 1960, and up until the day that we were working there, the population of that downtown was dropping. And the city's attempt to bring back involved welcoming a Somali Bantu population, a large population, a considerable and visible population to their downtown. TPDC did a great job. Lewiston has this commitment, and now Lisbon Street, which is their main street, is completely revived, and in a very cool way that mixes culture. That you feel like you're having a deep, you feel like you're traveling, you're having a rich experience, and it wasn't easy. So, and slowly, if you check now, the population of Lewiston is on the increase again. These are plans that I think all the new urbanists should learn about. They were success stories. We can talk about success stories. And just one little bit, and then I pass this over. Equity questions are pretty complex. And so I'll pose this question to the new urbanists who are listening, right? We'll talk about the Yucca Argyle apartments in Hollywood, California. And so here's a proposal on the left for a 2-story apartment building with 40 apartments to turn into, a large mixed-use place on the right. And it's a project that did a good job in terms of the public realm. There's storefronts and there's on-street dining. They planned to build a much bigger sidewalk. The street isn't perfect. It didn't have on-street parking. Perhaps there's not a bike lane yet, but in their proposal, they presented something that the charter, I feel, and that most new urbanists would just applaud and they would love. But specifically, you look at the details. They had 40 essentially temporarily affordable units, and it would be turning into 200 market rate units and roughly 40 affordable units. But they'd be mixed use, it'd be hotel and restaurants, and all of this was TOD. It's all within walking distance. And you can't help but feel like that before image is it's time for it to transform. My guiding principle as a planner has always been the greatest good for the greatest number, right? Utilitarianism. The morally right action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So this is how we say no to the NIMBYs who don't want to sacrifice one iota of anything in order to make other people to give other people a great deal. So the greatest good at the greatest number, and that would say that the one on the right is the choice. But for an equity planner, they look at it differently. The people in those 40 units would have an intolerable situation. They were elderly, they were low income. It would be a devastating effect on their life, those 40 families. And so the job of the equity planner is to avoid putting people into desperate situations or making intolerable choices. It's the first requirement of a decent society. And so equity planners in Hollywood said no to this project. They were resisting it. They were making it impossible. And they were saying pause. And that's what equity planners do. And the end result was that the project, a lot of conversation with housing advocates and with nonprofits and local leadership. In the end, the plan is for all of the renters who would be displaced, they get to move back into the new project. And for the time of the construction, 2 years, 3 years potentially, they would be housed by the developer at the same price that they were living. And so that's it. You need to protest a little. You need to hold out and you need to demand now, in this time, equitable solutions. Let me pass this over to Kessie.
Okay, let me know if you can see my screen. Okay. So I will be talking about the zoning update for the Broadway mixed-use district in West Palm Beach, Florida. So West Palm is anyone who's familiar with Florida is it's a city south of north of Miami. And if you're familiar with like West Palm Beach, you probably would think it's a very wealthy community. But Broadway Boulevard is a bit different. So currently, the corridor is has a lot of vacant buildings, a lot of empty lots. It's very dilapidated. There's a lot of crime. There's a lot of drugs going on in the corridor. So it needs to be revitalized. So we had our kickoff meeting last year in September. In our first meeting, we had over 180 people. And one of the exercises that we did with the community was that we printed very large maps and we had everyone sit down at tables and we had them write on the maps and tell us exactly what they wanted to see change within their community. And at the end of the exercise, we had each group, one person from each group stand up in front of the group and basically give a small summary of everything that happened during the event. And it went really well. We were able to have a lot of people that usually don't come to those meetings participate. One thing that we did is that we asked the members of the public that attended that meeting, what was one word that came to mind about the Broadway corridor now? And they weren't shy about their answers. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of crime. They said that it was sketchy, a lot of prostitution. So right now, it's a very rundown corridor, and they weren't shy about telling how dangerous they felt in the corridor, but they were hopeful. Because we also asked them, what is one word that come to mind about Broadway corridor for what they want to see for the corridor in the future? And the answers that were very positive. They saw potential. They wanted it to be more safe. They wanted more modern. They wanted a prosperous corridor. They wanted to feel more of a community. They wanted to get rid of the prostitution and the drugs happening currently in the corridor. So this is a picture of what the corridor looks today. This picture is from the Broadway, from on the corner of Broadway and one of the many perpendicular street that crosses Broadway Boulevard. And right now there's a lot of empty lots, a lot of empty vacant buildings, and it's not a very pedestrian safe place. There's not a lot happening within the corridor. With our code update, this picture shows the potential of what could happen on the corridor. So right now, as of right, with the code update, the code will allow for buildings to go up to 3 stories. Currently, the corridor is mostly zoned residential, and the existing commercial that are there are kind of grandfathered in. So the code is allowing for more businesses to be in the corridor. Now, with public benefits, developers will be allowed to go up to 6 stories. And some of the public benefits that they could offer to get to that 6 stories would be workforce housing between 80 to 100% AMI, or workforce housing between 60 to 80% AMI, and to provide locally owned commercial spaces. We also propose that they could also have provide community social service provider spaces. And those spaces would be up to 3 additional floors for businesses. And they would be spaces for nonprofit organizations, which would provide childcare, education, drug treatment, women's shelter, transition. They could also provide municipal or quasi-municipal organization space that provide police substation and emergency health services. What was interesting, however, is that the city did not want those spaces to be provided as an incentive for more height. And their argument was that currently the Broadway corridor is oversaturated with those spaces. They already have a lot of it. They feel like they have too much of it. And in order for the corridor to change for the better, their argument was that they needed to kind of stop a little bit with those spaces and open the door for other uses so the corridor could change for the better. One benefit that they did like was the idea to provide locally owned commercial spaces. And those spaces, developers would have to provide up to 3 additional floors for locally owned businesses. And the criteria for those businesses would be that they would have to make less than 1 million per year. They would have to be owned and operated at 51% by a county resident living within 5 miles of the corridor. Those businesses would have to remain locally owned for a period of 20 years, and they would have to be small in size. So they could not go over 2,500 square foot increment. And all of this is to ensure that those spaces are small enough and they stay local for a long period of time in order to not displace existing local small businesses. So they liked this public benefit idea. Now, one example of a CRA that has successfully provided business spaces for minority and local tenant is the CRA of Fort Lauderdale. So for the past decade, I would say, the CRA of Fort Lauderdale has been working along Sistrunk Boulevard. Sistrunk Boulevard is a historically African-American neighborhood. It has similar properties as Broadway Boulevard. And so the CRA of Fort Lauderdale, they've been working on a revitalization effort, and they've built a lot so far. And this shows one of their minority tenants. So this is the Blue Tree Cafe, located in the newly renovated 5-bay retail building that they also financed. And this building is called the Provident, and it's a small restaurant that specializes in plant-based soul food, and the tenant is from South Florida, and it's a minority tenant. And the CRA of Fort Lauderdale has been able to finance a lot of their project. And if you want to know more about Sistrunk Boulevard and what the CRA of Fort Lauderdale is doing, make sure to attend Jason and I's session at CNU 32. I can talk about Sistrunk all day, but if you want to know more about it, if you're attending CNU 32, make sure to attend that session. Now, going back to Broadway Boulevard, another policy that we implemented in the code is a vacant commercial building ordinance. So like I said previously, there's a lot of vacant commercial buildings currently along the Broadway corridor, and they are remaining vacant because the owners, they're just not doing anything with it. So the picture shows an existing vacant building along the corridor. So what this ordinance would do is that it would make sure that those vacant buildings, that they register with the city, and those buildings would not be allowed to remain vacant indefinitely. And the owners would have to submit a plan to the city of what they will do to the structure. And if they decide to demolish the structure, they have a year to do so. And they have a certain amount of time where they can renew their plan before the city fine them. So that's just a way to make sure that there's no vacant buildings remaining for a long period of time throughout the corridor. So now, there's only so much that the code can do when it comes to anti-displacement policy. So we also recommended that the city does a complement amendment to make sure that these policies can be implemented into their comp plan. So they would have to have a displacement mitigation plan, which would be a condition for rezoning within the Broadway mixed-use district. And they would have to have displacement studies and plans to uncover the potential loss of existing residents and businesses if no protection policies or programs are created. And they would have to provide tenant relocation assistance programs, which means that if they are displacing renters, for example, they would have to provide them a place within the new development or a place for them to go if they don't want to stay within the new development. This is another photo of what Broadway Boulevard looks today. This photo is taken within the corner of Broadway Boulevard and 40th Street. And Natalie in our office did a really nice rendering of what this corridor could look like within our code and with the added public benefits. And if you look, we made sure to leave space for the existing buildings, for the existing commercial uses, to show that with this code being implemented, there will be space for the locally owned businesses to remain within the corridor. And one thing that we successfully were able to do with our public effort for the Broadway Boulevard is that we were able to reach people that we usually aren't able to reach in our planning efforts. So our second meetings, we went back again to the Manatee Lagoon, and we had another big meeting, but we had to find creative ways to engage members of the community that usually don't feel comfortable coming to those public meetings. So after the big meeting at Manatee Lagoon, we had two separate meetings. So the second meeting was with the Northern Rise Community Resource, and that's the African American community agency within the Boulevard. And that meeting was a smaller meeting, and it allowed people that maybe didn't feel comfortable going to the bigger meeting to come to that meeting and really talk to us one-on-one and tell us what they wanted to see for the corridor. Another thing that we managed to do is that the Broadway corridor currently is very diverse, and there's a lot of different cultures and different people. So we were able to have a fully Spanish meeting. So Natalie and Jackie in our office, they speak Spanish. So we had a third meeting at the Esperanza Community Center, and that's the Hispanic Center for the corridor. And we had another small meeting entirely in Spanish for the Spanish immigrants that don't speak English and that usually would not know about this effort if we didn't go out of our way to have a meeting all in Spanish and include them. And that's just an example of how we were able to meet people where they are and reach people that usually would not feel comfortable going to the bigger meetings within that project. And I will send this to Diana.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. I think, Kessie, can you share the screen, please? Oh, there we go. Okay. Thanks. So my name is Diana, and I don't do as much technical work as Jason and Kessie, but I've been in the business of architecture and urban planning for a few years. But I learned the most when I worked at Bethany House, which is a shelter and a food kitchen that serves people in the community. So this is my story, and then we're going to go into a case study that sort of helped my story influence our work. So Dorothy Day is one of my favorite people. If you don't know her, I think she's a saint. She's not officially a saint yet, but she was a writer and activist, and she lived among the poor. She believed that the warmth of an individual, a sense of love, and community was the real turnkey as it related to social justice. And I admire her because even though she had a difficult life, and she felt that long loneliness that a lot of us feel in our life, she still pointed herself to others so as to be of service to them, to be a community for them. And 15 years ago, I went through a rough patch of depression. I was socially isolated in my suburban home in Laredo as a young mother. And part of my therapy was to go out and meet people and to help others, to serve others. So as luck would have it, my uncle was he was the president of the Bethany House, which is that shelter. And so that's where my journey and interest in affordable housing began. I've been helping the people experiencing homelessness ever since, and now hopefully preventing that experience through our housing work at Able City. Prior to forming Able City, our firm practiced architecture only, but we felt constrained as we tried to make people-centric places. We realized we were pitted against outdated planning codes and public policy that failed to promote the wishes of the community. So we decided to expand our practice into planning, and it became evident very quickly that the driving force for improving quality of life and place lies in the advocates and the community members that need these things and push for them. So in 2017, we teamed up with Kohl Partners, and we worked on the Viva Laredo Comprehensive Plan. And that's where we were able to practice exactly what Arnstein teaches about the requisite component of citizen power in any worthwhile, equitable plan. With our partners at Kohl helping on the technical aspects of the plan, our local team was able to pull out all the stops and outreach and awareness prior to the charrette. Little did we know just how effective a strategy this was to prevent what the book refers to as the tyranny of the minority, the NIMBYs. So getting everyone's voices out there really helped us get to know everyone's needs and bring that to the forefront of the plan. We reached out to the community advocates that were already engaged in their own interests, including the housing and homeless advocates, connecting their needs to the plan's potential to help their causes. Altogether, we gathered a great deal of groups, all plugged from their perspective. They would each have their own piece of the plan to claim for their cause. Historic participation led to a speedy implementation of many goals the first 2 years. We had our first bike infrastructure investment. The city passed it. We created a mobility committee, an arts commission, and we carried these lessons onto our future projects. So 7 years later, and many lessons learned later, we were selected to master plan a 550-unit public housing redevelopment in San Antonio. The Alasan Apache courts were the first public housing units in San Antonio authorized under the Housing Act of 1937 and remains the oldest and largest public housing complex in the city. It sits on the near west side of downtown San Antonio, where gentrification fears have galvanized a grassroots movement. A previous plan for full demolition and redevelopment had recently failed in a very public way that we had nothing to do with. Although the advocacy that stopped the plan was well-intentioned and the process they halted was flawed and generally uninterested in the community's goals, their position to not introduce any new construction was in conflict with the proper fulfillment of the residents' needs. We had to start building trust, as the book states, being, quote, to quote Jason's book, prudent developers and local governments seeking the involvement of decision makers, stakeholders, and the general community at the beginning of their projects and throughout the development of their projects to allow public opinion and the power held by the public to guide decisions. So yeah, we were very cautious at the beginning to move at the speed of trust and listening, an intense listening and a dialogue to make sure that we were really serving the community's needs and not our own ideas about their needs. We pursued the new master plan RFQ with the prerequisite that all the old plans were scrapped and that the public input would actually influence the outcome. We didn't get hired to convince or placate a community that needed a real voice. There is a section in Equity Planner titled Talk to Everyone, and that's what it took. After a rocky start with inadequate participation by the residents, they weren't coming to us at the community center or even stopping by when we set up tables on site. We pivoted to go truly to where they were. We met them where they were at. We walked and knocked on all 501 doors. We met them, talked to them, mostly in Spanish. Thankfully, our office, we're mostly Spanish speakers. Well, we're bilingual. And we explained to them that their voice was important. We made sure to include, we were a group of people, so we split up and yeah, we made sure that we went up safely and always with English and Spanish speakers in the group. So we designed an in-depth collaborative mutual learning process with the residents so they were able to provide fully informed opinions. I think this is what was really key to the success in this project. We recommended the residents be compensated for their time, so our clients paid them stipends to attend. We provided dinner and childcare, and the participation was consistent throughout an eight-month-long process. It was critically important to create a safe space for residents to voice their concerns, sort of like what Kessie was saying. So prior to this effort, meetings included residents together with the very well-educated and vocal historic preservationists. But we realized that the setting was discouraging the residents from sharing their experiences living in the old, moldy, uncomfortable units. And additionally, the housing authority, when they were present, also intimidated the residents. So they understood that it would be better if them and the preservationists were not in the same meetings as the residents. So we had separate committees. The entire process was put online and updated weekly. Full transparency was a main goal. And we invited the historians to tell the story and the significance of Alasan on the local and national stage. But we also invited the residents to share their stories, some generations long, about life at Alasan. And we put together a session to explain financing structures related to subsidized housing. We forced our finance consultant to tell the story in a way that everyone could follow. And the residents were taken through a variety of finance strategies to show the pros and cons of each and how it would affect them. We designed a session that explained in layman terms all the physical constraints and opportunities of the site: floodplains, modern versus historic building envelope, the challenge of increasing unit sizes to modern standards within the confines of their existing units. The debate holding up the process prior to our effort was related to preservation versus demolition. We had to explain why you could not rely only on existing buildings to improve and invest in the project. One could not fulfill the promise of not displacing people without building at least some new buildings on the site. The session ended with a survey of resident priorities for redevelopment. The non-resident advocates, mostly historic preservationists, had slightly different priorities. After these sessions, we held a community design workshop where we asked them to help us fit the total area of building needed on their site. The exercise taught the residents through a properly scaled Lego model that some hard decisions about preserving and building new was required in order to grow our building footprint by 40%. Their design choices tracked against the survey and committee meeting discussion data. We had to combine preservation, selective demolition, and new buildings. From the charrette, we narrowed down the options to 4 distinct concepts, each focused on a big idea. We included these choices in our bilingual survey, and the final result was a combination of maintaining the street character and maximizing the green space. Restoring the street and enhancing the comfort and safety they wanted and needed is illustrated here. Here we see the street facing restored buildings with the new, higher, more dense housing tucked in the back. Between each one is a shared court with green space and programmed playgrounds, basketball courts and community gardens, which is what they wanted. In the end, not only did we not forcefully displace one resident, none of them were displaced, we added 55 units to the overall 550 unit count through our combined strategy of preservation and densification. The finance model had been selected, and it allows the inclusion of other income levels gradually over time through natural turnover of residents, and always with resident input coming along with any changes. And phase 1 will be under construction by the end of this year. So at the office, we are interested in inclusive capitalism. So equity is about being inclusive, like Jason said at the beginning. And we practice listening in our office. That's part of being inclusive. We endeavor to do the same, like we're doing in our communities, of listening in the office. So we were accepted as members to the Council on Inclusive Capitalism. And it's a platform for action, a community of learning, and a movement for change to assist in creating more equitable, sustainable societies. If you want to learn more, you should look up their website. But part of our membership requires us to make hard commitments within our own community, starting with our own employees. It's part of our shared value initiative. Inclusive capitalism is dynamic, it's trusted, it's fair, it's sustainable, and it's responsible. So this is one example of a commitment that we adopted. Some of our employees, well, all of our employees had a seat at the table. They discussed what their needs were, what they needed. We decided to start with the smallest unit first, which is the family. Like, what did they need for their families to be well? What do they need to be well at the office? What does our industry need? Where does the change need to happen? What do our clients need? What does the planet need? And so at all these levels, we started making commitments. This is one example of a commitment that we made. We were creating a culture of interdependency and community care, equity planning from the inside out. We felt it of no sustainable value to plan for equity in a city unless it's first being practiced from the smallest unit outwards. And I agree with Dorothy Day. Equity planning is the only way forward where everyone's being taken care of. So, yeah, back to you, Lauren.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jason, Kessie, and Deanna, for that wonderful presentation. So I am now going to ask a couple of questions, and if you as audience members have any questions, you can feel free to put those in the Q&A function, and we'll get to those shortly. So to start with you, Jason, I have a question, which is, in what ways do equity planners engage with new urbanist practices and tools, and how can new urbanism make places more equitable?
Good question, Lauren. I just happen to have a slide on hand to help explain that. Let's do this. So a big part of the book is the toolkit, and the toolkit talks about different tools. So, Kessie talked about a couple, vacant commercial building ordinances, that's in the list, or the anti-displacement plans, that's there. There's things that the new urbanists specifically are champions of, like accessory dwelling units, or the missing middle standards, you see those on the list, or micro units, or just the relaxation of development rules in order so that way stuff can actually get built. Urbanists are great at parking setback reductions. And I think the spots are what we have to learn more about. If you're like me working for developer clients, it used to be enough just to provide gorgeous walkable mixed-use urbanism, great public realm. But now it's, without an affordable housing component, without a real commitment to permanent affordability, some portion of your traditional neighborhood development is, without that, we're not getting the rezonings, right? So one thing that we have to learn about is how to partner with nonprofit affordable housing providers, for instance. We need to help our developer clients do that. We need to help them understand low-income housing tax credit, or tax relief for affordable units, or just generally how one adds permanent affordability to great new communities. So the toolkit talks about that. I'll just say really quick, parks are a big part of this, and Mitchell Silver did a great CNU park bench the other day about, because he used to be the commissioner in New York City working on parks. A lot of it is open space and community land trusts and making public spaces that people feel comfortable in. So item by item, the book goes through each of these tools. I was kind of inspired by the book done by Dwani and Leiden and Speck, the Smart Growth Handbook. Just small, digestible bits, to describe how this stuff can be put into the new urbanism. So yeah, there's a list, and it requires us to learn a lot of new things.
Wonderful. That was a great slide, Jason. That is super helpful. We already have a couple requests in the chats, wondering if that can be shared, because I think people really find that a valuable resource.
Yeah.
So my next question is for Kessie. And it is, how can today's urban planners best acknowledge harm and center communities? And how do you reach communities that have been historically harmed by inequitable planning practices? And I know you talked a little bit about this already, but if you have anything else you'd like to share.
I think as planners, we need to make more of an effort to truly engage every members of our community that we're planning for, and really go out of our way to make sure that we speak to those people, and not only engage them, but also empower local leaders within those communities and make sure that they understand what the process is, because having those local leaders being part of the process will just make it, they will, if they understand the process, then they will explain it to their communities, and they will help you get them engaged and help you have them come to your meetings. And that would be a way to just make them part of the process instead of just planning and they don't even know what's happening.
Great, thank you so much. And then I also have a question for Deanna, which is, what does equitable urban planning look like to you? And how does it differ from place to place? And are there any similarities or trends in successful places?
Yeah, well, I think it begins with like what Jason talked about, Russell, saying that the traits of an equitable, sensitive planner is that sensitivity and that courageousness. Like, I think the most important part we can play is helping elect leaders who are sensitive and who are, transparent, who are courageous to make these changes that really prioritize the people who are not included. Equitable planning is about inclusivity. So I think we can start by really looking for sensitivity in our elected officials. The second part of that question was, what does it look like? Yeah, it looks like inclusion as the most important part of equity, and that means, like, in order to include someone, you sort of have to know them and care about them and love them. Like, if you go to a middle school, the bullies always leave out the people who they don't know. Once you get to know somebody, you care about them. So I think it's part of getting to know everyone you can around you and getting to know their story and understand them, because once you know someone, it's hard, not to love them. And then comes commitment. Just how we're trying to do in the office and what we're all doing as urbanists. We can look at other countries like Texas. I live in Texas, and there's not a big commitment, I feel, to people who don't own a car. But in the Scandinavian countries, there's a high level of trust between citizens. They know each other, and that's social cohesion. When there's an increased level of trust, living in a community can become a more pleasant experience, and everyone's a little safer. If you've read Klinberg's book about Palaces for the People, they talk about the Chicago heat wave, and the people that were most at risk for dying were those who were socially isolated, who didn't know their neighbors. And that social infrastructure that the urbanists try and build is just so incredibly important, because with that infrastructure, you get to know your community. And so equity planning is successful when you really know your community, when you know your neighbor, when you can love them and take care of them. And it all makes us safer, and happier.
Great, thanks so much, Deanna. I really enjoyed that. Now I'm gonna go through a couple of our audience questions. And so this first one is, can you provide your best tips on how to structure an inclusive planning process before engaging in planning work? And then they just followed that up with, I'm wondering if developing the scope in conjunction with the community is part of that inclusivity piece.
This is neat. I think we should all try to answer this one. Best tips. So the charrette. I still believe that the charrette, which I think with the urbanism invented and certainly perfected, is the best way of being inclusive, because a charrette is fun, it's exciting, it's interesting. You're at the beginning of something, you're there at the end, within a week, within 2 weeks. It's got a lot of different activities for people to participate in. There's meetings in the middle of the conference room with experts, and the public is able to listen on the side. I think this thing that was invented for what we do, it actually works great in every context. So I really like that. But yeah, the development community, that's the other thing that the New Urbanists offer, right? We see both sides of view. Our movement was born in like Seaside and gorgeous new communities. And we understand what the constraints they live on. And that's important. So we're in a bridge between capital and development and the people who are affected, if we choose to be. So yeah, very much. I think we can bring developers to the table, and everybody learns, and it's a much better outcome.
I might add to that too, that what we learned well, I really understand what you're saying, and I agree. But to add to that, sometimes it's great to do like the anti-charrette and make your public engagement process very long, because that's when you really, really begin to understand. So when we did Alasan, it was an 8-month process, like an 8-month charrette, sort of like just multiple meetings until we heard from everybody. Instead of like fast and intense, it was slow, and we literally moved at the speed of trust. And it took a long time. It took many conversations, a lot of listening, a lot of like, did we get it right? Because their time is they're busy. So for them to give us time, it's very slow, because we can only get an hour of their time a week. So I just wanted to add that.
I also want to add that I agree with Jason and Diana that the charrette is one of the most important tools that we have. I also think we need to be we need to learn to be more creative with how we advertise the charrette. Like, we are a global community now. There's so many ways to engage people, especially younger people, through the internet, social media. And I think as planners, we need to learn to leverage those tools and advertise through those platforms to have a more diverse group of people attend our meetings.
Thank you so much for those insights, everyone. Very interesting with the whole idea of the speed of trust and the charrette and the anti-charrette. Just because we're getting close to time, I just want to take an opportunity to thank everybody for joining today, and to note that a recording of this webinar will be available tomorrow if anybody has to leave right at 1. We have a couple more questions to go through, so I'm going to keep going on those questions. This one is pretty related to the last one about charrettes, and is just wondering about the role of virtual participation in equity, and has it expanded the ability to reach populations? What are the successes? What are the issues that are still being you're confronting with this virtual participation aspect?
Yeah, so if I could just start with that one. Yeah, so we had no choice but to learn the virtual charrette. We'd always preferred in person, right? You're more influential in person, you listen better when you're in person. But COVID worldwide pandemic taught us the virtual charrette. We got very good at it. And now there's a virtual component to every one of our projects. We try to offer online the same experience, same exercises, same questions that we offer, in person. I think, and now slowly, and then public meetings were online for a long time because they had to be. Slowly, it's unfortunate, but we've been seeing more and more public meetings closed. They're no longer online like they used to be. And I think that's a whole segment of the population is being lost. I think especially what I saw with the virtual charrettes were moms raising kids. So we always say on our save the date cards, we always say bring your kids, and we provide for them. There's a kids table, but it's hard to travel with kids. It's hard to bring them to these things, and for a little while there was just a lot of kids playing loudly in the background when we were answering questions and showing designs. And so, can we keep doing that? Can we keep finding a way? Can we have one person at the charrette who's manning the virtual booth, right? And and they're talking to the elderly population. They're talking to people who just aren't comfortable going to a public meeting. Even developers or very busy local governance. They're not going to go to the high school cafeteria, but they might just participate in a stakeholder meeting if it's beamed right to their desk. So I think we learned how to be a lot more inclusive with the virtual charrette. I still like meeting people in person, but we need to keep those tools on the table too, I think.
Yes, well, as you can see, we're in a virtual webinar right now, so we've definitely also adapted to this virtual setting. All right, I just have a
Oh, sorry.
go
I'd
for
also
it,
like
Kessie.
to add that the virtual charrette, I've noticed personally that it also encourage younger people to attend the meetings. I remember in school when I would go to planning meetings, you know, the traditional 6 to 9 p.m. meeting, it's usually an older crowd. But with the virtual charrette, I find more of the younger population attend those meetings because, like Jason said, because it's convenient.
Thanks so much, Kessie. Absolutely. And so we just have kind of two questions about downtowns that I'm going to combine as our kind of last thing before we go, which is basically how does mixed youth growth in downtown development projects, how can we ensure equitable outcomes and prevent displacement of economically disadvantaged communities, especially if the state prohibits the city from implementing rent controls? What are other tools or things that people can use?
So just to think about that. So the downtown is a place that everybody has in common. And so our work often starts in the downtown. But I'd say, you know, we have to think about more than just the downtown. We had a successful downtown project in Montgomery and in El Paso, and then the city kept bringing us back to work with the neighborhoods. And it's a whole different set of issues, but equally important. You know, the downtown is just a series of successful neighborhoods. So number one, we need to leave the downtown with our work and our knowledge. But let's say, yeah, if there's a lot increasingly rent control or mandatory inclusionary zoning ordinance, renter protections, they're all slowly being overridden by at the state level, and it's actually getting harder and harder to put in place programs that, to be honest, just exist as commonplace in most of Western Europe. So what do you do? How do you keep affordability? So Kessie did a great job explaining how optional system was what we did there in West Palm Beach. We allowed them to go higher and to build a lot more. Instead of 30% minimum, rather instead of 30% maximum lot coverage, they were able to access much more of the site, build on 80% of the site. And they were able to go up to 3 full stories. But in order to go higher, then comes the trade, right? That then comes the community benefits. And allow. For the most part, you're still able to bargain. And so we had to build into our form-based codes, like they do with Miami 21, like DBZ did an excellent job with. We need to build in affordable housing in order to get the extra. I think that's still something that we're allowed to do.
Thanks so much, Jason, for a very thoughtful answer. And with that, since we're a little bit past 1 o'clock, I will go ahead and wrap up this wonderful webinar. Thank you to Deanna, Kessie, and Jason for being here. As a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be available tomorrow on our website. So thank you all for attending and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you.
Thank
Jason.
you, Lauren.